This here is a little demo to show you some things about Maya rotation, rotation order, and gimbal lock, which is some things that you're going to run up against doing your animation, especially with arms. And what we have here, I'm going to be using the Goon character to show you some of these things, but what I'm going to show you is going to be appropriate for any character or any object in Maya for that matter. We have the Goon character set up here, and his arms are in forward kinematic, or FK, which means that they move. You have to move the shoulders and the elbows and the wrists, and the wrists here independently from each other. So if you wanted to position his arms, you would have to go through each one of these joints here and rotate them independently to get the position that you want. And there's some advantages to that. But some things you need to think about is that depending on how your character is oriented in the scene right now, he's coming in default at XYZ. So this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and the z-axis is going to be coming forward like so. And you have to remember that the rotation of each one of these, each one of his parts of his body are going to be oriented to how he is placed in the scene. So I'm going to go to his arms, for example, and I'm going to just press the E key to get the rotation tool. And as I rotate, look over here on the right side in the channel box, and you can see that there's rotation values that are being done as I rotate the Y. And let's go and rotate the X for a second, and you can rotate the X, and I can rotate the Z. Now these are moving because he is oriented in the oriented in the scene to the world, which is XYZ. All of these line up. I'm going to open up over here on the right side. I'm going to show you that again. Over here on the left side, excuse me, the rotate tool, and this will bring up some rotation settings that are going to be important. This character comes in rotated default at local, which means that the local rotation is going to be oriented to all of the rest of the body, and since he's default, it's always going to be to X, Y, and Z in the world. If I were to change it to world, nothing really changes here. His body's going to, or his arm is going to move to X, Y, and Z pretty much accurately to the scene. However, something you need to know, that I'm gonna twist his body just a little bit here, and I'm going to take now if you look at it, his body is at a diagonal to the world, but the rotation is still at world, and it is going to be locked to the world position, which basically it kind of puts an angle at the rotation. So his rotations are not going to be pretty much what you want. I mean, it's going to be just rotated to the world, and there's advantages to this, but as you can see, this really doesn't really work for what I want to do. If I were to put it back to local, the local will orient the rotation to his body, which gives it a more accurate looking, rotation. But I want you to look over here at the channel box, and let's put it back to 0. Let's just look, he's on local rotation, and I'm going to rotate the Z, which is pretty accurate, but then I'm going to rotate his other axes. So now I have the axes rotated off X, Y, and Z, and I'm rotating the Y-axis, but look at it's making a calculation at all 3 rotations. So basically, for this arm to move, it's not just moving in one axis, it's moving in multiple axes to make a diagonal position, to make a diagonal direction of his arm. And this is something that could potentially kind of get you into trouble if you were to move his arm into a position that's past sort of the limitations of the world axis, you might find yourself getting something that's called gimbal lock. So I'm going to show you what gimbal lock is in just a second. I'm going to put him back to the default position here. And I'm going to grab his arm here, and something I want to show you, I'm going to open up the rotate tool again, and I'm going to put the rotation setting, the rotation mode, to gimbal. Now gimbal is very important. Gimbal, despite what rotation mode you are in, it could be local, it could be world, but it's always going to rotate in gimbal. Gimbal is just what Maya is basically set up to rotate despite how he is oriented in the scene. So you might think, again, so I'm going to put it at gimbal, you might think that you're rotating something. Well, let me show you. I'm going to put it in gimbal, and let's just close this tool, and I'm going to rotate his arm in the Y. So there's a rotation order dominated by the Y axis. Now let's just get in a little closer here so we can see what we're doing here. And I'm going to rotate the Y axis of his arm. I'm going to move his arm forward 90 degrees or about. Okay, now take a look at these other axes, the red and the blue, which is the X and the Y axes, or the X and the Z, and they're going to come together and they're going to meet. Okay, if I were to rotate the Y 90 degrees, I'm just going to put that in there, the X and the Z axes come together, which basically means I don't have any other axes to move his arm forward. If I wanted to move his arm up and down like this, like forwards and backwards like that, like the swing of an arm, I basically am unable to do that. Now you say, well, why don't I just take it out of gimbal mode? I'm going to put it back at 90, and I'm going to go into my tool setting, and I'm going to put it back at local, and that seems to fix it. Okay, and so now, yeah, I have all that rotation going on here. I can get that rotation that I want of his, doing a little paddling view. But I want you to look at something here. Now, if I were to move one of these axes, like so, like his x-axis, or his z-axis, look that all of these rotations are moving at a very high rate, and they're all three moving at the same time. So to get that that motion of the arm that I first thought was impossible to do because it was gimbal locked, now is possible. But as you can see, it takes quite a bit of rotation calculations to make that actually happen. So what essentially could occur is, I'm going to go here, I'm going to make a, bring his arm down like that. I'm going to bring it out of the scene. I'm going to keyframe it. I'm going to go to 24. I'm going to bring his arm up and keyframe it. And notice what I intended to do was a straight up and down of the arm, like so. And I keyframed it in this position, in that position. However, look how it is actually rotating. It's actually taking a curved route, and that is because to actually make that rotation possible, it has to do multiple x-y calculations, a whole bunch of them, every frame, to try to get it to that position, and it's just not doing it exactly, and it's giving you this this odd line of action that you don't really want, when I just really want it to go up and down like that. Okay, so I'm going to undo all that. I'm going to bring it back to the default position here, and he should be at 0. Yeah, pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it's back at gimbal mode here. which is how I want to see how accurately it is actually moving. But let's just say, for example, I put his arms down. Let's see, I put his arms forward like that, but I want to have this forward position. I'm going to select that, that controller, and I'm going to open up its attributes. And I'm going to go into the upper right arm control. This is actually the controller here. I'm going to look at that. And I have here in the transform attributes rotate order, and it defaults to X, Y, Z. That means that the Z or the X basically is the dominant, and everything after that follows. Actually, it is the, I stand corrected, it is the Z that is the one that is on top. I know that it has it at the order is X, Y, Z, but everything follows. The Z will drive the X and the Y and the X, and the Y will drive the X, and the X is just the last one. That doesn't drive anything else. So let's go back. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go change the rotate order to Z, Y, X. Look what that did. Okay, so it didn't really change anything. It just changed the rotation order of the gimbal. So now, if I put his arms forward like that, and if I were to put his arms down like that, he can swing his arms in kind of a fashion that you want, and it's not going to gimbal lock. It'll gimbal lock when I get to here, and I can't, well, I can move it that way, but it's not going to be able to move this way again. It's not going to be able to move if I it's not going to be able to do this sort of action if I were to bring it forward like that. Actually, you know, it just depends on, you have to go and you have to look and see what your character is going to be doing and what your dominant action is going to be. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to undo. Let's just put it back to 0 there. And let's put it back to default. So if I look at my rotation order, you know, I'm going to say, okay, well, if I do ZYX and if I put his arms down like that, and then I get the proper motion, I get the proper range of action for his arm according to what I intend to do, without running into a gimbal lock situation that could possibly kind of trip you up and cause you some problems along the way. If I were to go and change the rotation mode to either local or world, you can see that it's actually not causing me as many problems. By changing the rotation order of the arm, you can pretty much sort of plan ahead and see what the proper rotation is going to be for your action.